The winter of had swallowed the entire duchy beneath an unbroken sheet of white silence. In the grand estate, frost crept along stone corridors and clung stubbornly to every window pane like a living thing. Inside this frozen world, Anna moved like a quiet flame that refused to be extinguished. At 23, she was the head cook, yet she carried herself with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the cold grandeur around her. Every morning before dawn, she lit the kitchen fires, her breath turning into mist as she worked without complaint. The servants often spoke of her kindness, how she would quietly divide her own portion of food among those who had less. But beneath her calm exterior lived a secret she guarded more fiercely than the castle gates themselves. Years earlier, during a violent snowstorm, a cloaked stranger had lifted her from the roadside and saved her life without revealing his name. That stranger had been Duke Alexander, though Anna had never known it was him. To her, he was only a memory wrapped in snow and warmth, a kindness that shaped her entire existence. Duke Alexander was now 24, a ruler burdened by expectations heavier than the crown he symbolically wore. He governed with discipline and precision, yet inside him lived a quiet emptiness he never spoke about. To the court, he was unshakable. To himself, he was someone slowly forgetting how to feel. The castle's kitchen, however, held a different kind of warmth, one that did not belong to royalty or power. Here, Anna's world and Alexander's rarely crossed, except when duty demanded meals be delivered to the upper halls. Yet fate had a way of bending rules inside the snowbound estate. One morning, as snow fell in thick, swirling curtains beyond the tall kitchen windows, Anna arrived earlier than anyone else. She set about her work immediately, coaxing life back into the hearth as the castle slowly awakened. For Anna, these moments of solitude were the only times she allowed herself to breathe freely. Later that day, the heavy kitchen door swung open without warning, letting in a rush of cold air that silenced the room. Anna turned quickly, expecting a servant, but instead found Duke Alexander standing there, his presence instantly commanding attention. He wore no ceremonial armor, only a dark coat dusted with snow, as though he had stepped directly out of winter itself. Anna lowered her gaze immediately, unsure why her heartbeat had suddenly betrayed its usual rhythm. He looked around the kitchen briefly before speaking, his voice calm yet carrying a weight of authority. "You work too hard, Anna." Anna nearly dropped the wooden spoon in her hand, startled by the familiarity of her name on his lips. "You should not be here, Your Grace," she said softly, bowing slightly as respect battled with confusion. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, as though her words amused him more than they should. "I came to escape the noise of court for a moment," he admitted, stepping closer to the warmth of the hearth. The firelight softened his sharp features, revealing a man who looked far younger than the world believed him to be. Anna hesitated before nodding, unsure how to respond to such unexpected honesty from the Duke. He studied her quietly, as if noticing for the first time the steadiness in her hands despite the harsh cold outside. "You keep this place warmer than the rest of the castle," he said after a pause, his tone unusually thoughtful. Anna felt her chest tighten, not from fear but from the strange sincerity hidden in his words. He turned to leave, then stopped at the doorway as if something unseen held him back. For a brief moment, the Duke looked at Anna not as a servant, but as something he could not yet name. As the snow outside thickened into a blinding white curtain, silence settled between them like an unspoken promise waiting to be understood. Anna quickly returned to her work, but her hands no longer obeyed her with the same steady discipline they once had. Alexander lingered for a moment longer, watching her as though trying to solve a puzzle he had just discovered. He finally spoke again, softer this time, almost as if he were speaking to himself rather than to her. Outside, the wind howled against the castle walls, but inside the kitchen, something unfamiliar had begun to stir. Weeks of routine would follow this moment, yet neither of them would ever forget the way it began. That was the day everything in the frozen castle quietly started to change. In that fragile silence between duty and desire, Anna and the Duke stood unknowingly at the edge of a future neither of them was prepared to understand, yet both would soon find impossible to ignore entirely together in snow. A subtle transformation began in the days that followed, though neither Anna nor Duke Alexander fully understood its direction at first. The castle, once defined by rigid silence, started to breathe differently whenever the Duke descended into the kitchens under various pretenses. Anna noticed how his visits, initially rare, had become almost habitual, as though the warmth of the hearth had begun to draw him in beyond reason. He no longer spoke only of duties or state affairs, but lingered on trivial matters, as if seeking excuses to remain near her presence. Anna, in turn, found herself listening more carefully than she should, her composure gradually eroding under the quiet gravity of his attention. The servants, ever observant within the narrow hierarchies of the estate, began exchanging glances that hinted at unspoken speculation. Whispers traveled through corridors like winter drafts, suggesting that something between the cook and the Duke was quietly shifting. One evening, Alexander stayed longer than usual, seated near the kitchen fire as snow battered the castle walls outside. The flickering light softened the severity of his expression, revealing a weariness that Anna had never noticed before. Without thinking, she offered him a cup of hot chocolate, a gesture that felt too intimate for their stations. Their fingers brushed as he accepted it, and the contact lingered longer than either of them intended or admitted. Silence filled the space between them, not uncomfortable but charged, like a storm suspended just before breaking. Alexander finally broke the silence by asking her about the life she had lived before the castle. Anna hesitated, surprised by his interest, before carefully choosing words that revealed only fragments of her past. She spoke of survival, of cold nights, and of a kindness that had once saved her life. The Duke listened with unusual stillness, as though each word was quietly reshaping something within him. For the first time, Anna saw not the ruler of, but a man capable of being moved. That realization unsettled her more than she cared to admit, because it blurred the boundaries she had carefully maintained. Days passed in this quiet tension, each encounter deepening a connection neither dared to define. Until one evening beneath falling snow, Alexander looked at her longer than propriety allowed and spoke with certainty. "You bring peace to places that have forgotten how to feel," he said quietly, his voice carrying an unspoken confession. Anna could not answer because something inside her had already begun to break open into hope she feared to name. Outside, the snow continued to fall relentlessly, but inside the kitchen, warmth and uncertainty grew together in equal measure. And neither Anna nor the Duke yet understood that this fragile beginning would soon be tested by forces beyond love alone. The court beyond the castle walls remained unaware of the delicate bond forming in the heart. But within those same walls, whispers of political alliance began to tighten like a noose around the Duke's future. Lady Victoria Hawthorne was introduced formally at court, her presence polished and strategically crafted for influence. Alexander greeted her with courtesy, but his thoughts remained elsewhere, always drifting back to the kitchen below. Anna, meanwhile, sensed a change she could not fully explain, as though distance itself had begun to grow between them. Yet she continued her duties with the same quiet diligence, hiding the storm forming inside her chest. One evening, a heated argument echoed from the Duke's private study, breaking the fragile calm of the estate. Anna paused outside the door, her hand trembling as voices inside grew sharper with each passing moment. She should have walked away, but something in her refused to move, binding her to the truth she feared. Inside the study, nobles demanded that Alexander choose duty over emotion, pressing him toward a politically advantageous marriage. Alexander stood silent for a long moment, the weight of expectations pressing down on him like iron chains. Then, with controlled restraint, he spoke words that would later fracture Anna's heart beyond repair. "She is only a cook," he said, his tone firm yet strangely detached, as though distancing himself from the statement. Anna heard nothing else after those words, her world collapsing inward as she turned away from the door. Snow struck her face as she stepped outside, but she barely felt the cold anymore, only the sharp fracture forming inside her chest. Without returning to the kitchen, she walked through the blizzard toward her small room, each step feeling heavier than the last. There she began to realize that love, once fragilely formed in silence, could also shatter without warning or explanation. She sat beside her dim candle, pressing a trembling hand to her chest as tears finally escaped without restraint. Outside, the storm raged on while inside her heart quietly broke into a silence that would change. Anna did not remember how long she stood in the falling snow after hearing the Duke's words. The world around her had turned silent, not because the storm had stopped, but because something inside her had collapsed into stillness. Each step back to the servants' quarters felt unfamiliar, as though she were walking inside someone else's life. The warmth of the kitchen, once her refuge, now felt like a place she no longer belonged to. She entered her small room without greeting anyone, her hands numb as she closed the door behind her. The flickering candle on the wooden table cast fragile light over everything she had ever owned. For a long time, she simply sat, listening to the wind pressing against the castle walls. Then slowly, reality returned in fragments too sharp to ignore. She replayed his voice, not the warmth she once knew, but the cold sentence that had ended everything. "She is only a cook." The words repeated in her mind until they lost meaning and became pain itself, yet it was the silence that followed which hurt more because it allowed no room for misunderstanding or hope. Anna pressed her palms against her chest, trying to steady the trembling she could not control. Outside, footsteps passed in the corridor, but none stopped at her door. She understood then that no one would come for her, not even the man she had silently loved for years. When dawn approached, she made a decision without allowing herself time to reconsider. She would leave the castle before the snow could bury her hesitation. In the dim light of morning, Anna packed her belongings into a small cloth bundle. Each item she touched carried memories she could not afford to keep. Before leaving, she sat at the wooden desk and began to write. The letter took shape slowly, as if each word weighed more than the last. "My dearest Alexander," she wrote, though her hand trembled as she continued. "When you read this, I will already be gone. Please do not look for me because I cannot stay where I am only a shadow. I thought for a brief moment that I mattered beyond my work, but I was mistaken. Still, I thank you for every kindness you showed me, even if I misunderstood their meaning. I will remember the snow, the kitchen, and the moments that felt like something more. Perhaps I loved you more than I should have allowed myself to. Perhaps that was my greatest mistake." She paused, tears falling onto the paper and blurring the ink. After a long silence, she continued writing with quieter resolve. "I do not blame you because people like me are not meant to belong in your world. I only ask that you do not carry guilt for what I chose to believe. Somewhere I hope you find the future that your duty demands of you. As for me, I will learn to live with the part of my heart I leave behind here. Forever yours in memory, Anna." When she finished, she folded the letter carefully and placed it on the center of the bed. The room felt emptier than before, as if even the walls understood she would not return. Without looking back, she stepped out into the snowstorm that swallowed her presence completely. Meanwhile, in the upper hall of the castle, Alexander remained unaware of the fracture that had already begun to separate their lives. He stood before his council, listening to arguments that no longer seemed to belong to him. Every word spoken about alliances and duty felt distant, as though spoken underwater. When the meeting ended, he walked without purpose toward the quieter parts of the estate. Something unsettled him, though he could not yet name what it was. He passed the kitchen, noticing its unusual silence, but did not stop. Only later would he realize that silence was the beginning of loss. When he finally asked for Anna, no one had an answer that satisfied him. The castle began to feel colder than it had ever been, though the fires still burned in every hall. That night, a maid arrived at his chamber carrying a single envelope. The moment Alexander saw the handwriting, something inside him tightened with unease. He opened it without hesitation, unaware that every word inside would change the meaning of everything he thought he knew. Alexander read the letter in a silence so deep it felt like the world itself had stopped breathing. For a long moment he did not move, as though understanding had struck him too late to be corrected. Then he whispered her name, as if speaking it might somehow bring her back into the empty room. He left the council chamber without explanation, ignoring the calls of advisors who no longer mattered to him. Outside, the storm had worsened, but Alexander rode into it as if pain had become his only direction. He searched villages buried under snow, repeating her name until it lost all meaning except desperation. For days, hope faded, yet something inside him refused to accept a world without Anna in it. Then in a small mountain town, he saw a bakery where children laughed behind frosted glass windows. He stepped inside slowly, snow melting from his coat, his heart beating louder than the storm outside. Anna stood behind the counter, and for a moment neither of them moved or spoke at all. Her eyes widened as recognition broke through the years of distance and silence between them instantly. Alexander crossed the room and pulled her into an embrace that carried every unsaid apology. Anna trembled, torn between love and the wound his earlier words had carved into her heart. "I was wrong," he said, voice breaking. "You were never only anything to me. I spent every moment searching for you because I realized I cannot live without you." Anna closed her eyes as tears fell, finally understanding the truth behind his broken words. "You heard the beginning, not the end," he said softly, holding her hands tightly. "I was declaring you the woman I would choose, even against the entire court." Silence fell between them, but this time it was no longer filled with misunderstanding. Outside, the snow softened, as though the world itself had begun to forgive them. Alexander knelt again, this time without fear, and took her hands as destiny finally aligned. "Marry me, Anna, not as duty demands, but as my only truth," he said. Anna looked at him, and for the first time she did not see a duke, but the man who had always been her quiet beginning and her impossible end. She nodded once, and the world they had broken slowly began to heal itself. Alexander kissed her gently as snow fell around them, sealing every wound into forgiveness. From that moment, the castle no longer held a duke and a cook, but two hearts choosing each other. They returned together, not as ruler and servant, but as partners rebuilding what love had nearly lost. And in every winter after, Anna was no longer the woman who left, but the one who was finally chosen. Their story became a reminder that love, once understood, can survive even the coldest snow. After that day, the castle changed in ways no council could have predicted or controlled. Anna returned, but not as someone seeking permission to exist within royal walls. She walked beside Alexander now, her presence no longer hidden in shadows of duty. The servants who once whispered began to bow with genuine respect instead of curiosity. Alexander, for his part, learned to listen to voices beyond politics and obligation. He often found himself returning to the kitchen where everything between them had begun. Anna would smile at him there, no longer afraid of what the world might say. Yet even in peace, Alexander remembered the pain of almost losing her forever. He promised himself never again to let misunderstandings stand between them. Winter after winter, their bond deepened, becoming stronger than the storms outside. One evening, Anna found the old letter she had once left behind in despair. She showed it to Alexander without fear, finally free from its painful memory. He read it again, then tore it gently as if releasing the last fragment of sorrow. Together they watched the pieces fall into the fireplace and disappear into ash. In that moment, the past no longer held power over either of them. The future belonged entirely to choices made together rather than fear or misunderstanding. Alexander held her hand as they stood at the balcony overlooking the snow-covered kingdom. Anna leaned into him, finally certain she was exactly where she was meant to be. And for the first time, the coldest winter have felt like the warmest beginning. Years later, their love became a legend spoken across the kingdom, not as a tale of rank or loss, but as one of understanding, patience, and redemption that survived every winter storm, reminding all who heard it that true love is never defined by position, but by the courage to choose someone fully, even when the world demands otherwise. Always remembered.